This novel takes place during the early 20th century, spanning from approximately 1910 to 1940. Set in Georgia, Southern racism had yet to end, and women were still supposed to be subservient to men. Most of what takes place outside in Celia's life is left unanswered or is very vaguely described. While dealing with the abuse and rape from her father, Celie begins to write letters to God. She has 2 children with her father, both of which are taken from her. She believes them to be dead. When a man referred to as Mr. by Celie shows interest in marrying Nettie, Celie's younger sister, Celie is instead offered to the man by her father. She is married off to Mr. despite still being a teenager and continues to be raped and abused. Celie later meets Shug, a woman whom Mr. had once been in love with. As Celie begins to get more comfortable with Shug, she begins to learn more about herself and life, including changing her perception of God and his role in Celie's life. Celie finally loses her tolerance of Mr.'s abuse and decides to move to Tennessee with Shug and begins running her own business. Celie later returns to Georgia to live a fully independent life. The entire book is written in a series of letters. Due to Celie being uneducated, the letters are poorly written with grammatical errors and slang. With little knowledge of the English language and literary elements, the majority of the book lacks figurative language and common literary devices, which contributes to the book's realistic encounters of a female African American in the early 19th century. This book was written in the postmodern literary time period as it was published in 1982. In the postmodern literary theme, this book is critical of societal issues during the time period, as Celie and her feministic journey occurs throughout the entirety of the book. The book begins with very simple letters written without much analysis. This represents Celie's lack of attachment to her own life. Due to her minimal education, she is unable to understand why things are happening in her life, nor does she write with any emotion towards what is happening to her. However, as Celie gains life experience and with the help of other women, she begins to develop a stronger sense of self. With the evolution of Celie, her writing becomes more analytical and she begins to write about her emotions along with the events taking place in her life. Celie's perspective continues to change on her life as she changes from writing to God to Nettie. By writing in the form of letters, the change in Celie's beliefs and her increasing knowledge on life is much more noticeable. This book can be looked at through many critical lenses, including cultural, archetypal, psychological, and feminist perspectives, all of which emphasize and highlight the struggles of women and minorities in this time period. Even though Celie is the main character in this book, her characterization in this book is wholly indirect as it is dependent upon other people such as Nettie, Sophia, Mr., and Shug. She is a dynamic character in that she transforms from an uneducated girl who belittles herself to a strong woman who stands up against her abuser and finds power to run her own life thanks to the empowerment given to her from other strong, independent females she met throughout the book. The theme of violence is prevalent throughout the book. Women are normally the victims of violence in The Color Purple as men exert their dominance by raping and beating their wives, and many of the women that experience this shut down psychologically. Celie originally responded to the violence by being submissive, but after she realizes that she is being emotionally abused, and not just physically, she draws up strength and removes herself from the situation by starting a new life. The theme of religion is also found throughout The Color Purple. Celie's view of God changes throughout the novel. In the beginning, she writes to him so she can be heard, but when her life doesn't seem to be getting any better, she gets frustrated at God and imagines he is just like all of the other wretched men in her life. Her perception of God changes throughout the book as other people influence how she sees him and eventually just ends up believing in God and nature rather than a man that is God. The theme of race is also found throughout the novel, given the heightened racial tensions of the era in which the book takes place. At the beginning of the novel, Celie seems to feel defeated and believes that she is simply getting by to get to heaven later. As an African American female living in the pre-civil rights South, she sees so many horrible, wrong things, including the treatment blacks received and the way blacks treated each other. However, as she begins to find faith in Shug and herself, along with learning about Africa from Nettie, she begins to respect herself and her kind. Love is another theme that is found in The Color Purple. For most of her life, the only person Celie loves is Nettie, which is why she sacrifices her life for her. Celie's rough experience with her father and her husband, who are anything but loving to her, could be the driving force behind her first romantic love she finds with a woman. Celie's love for Shug and her reciprocation help her get through her days. Throughout the novel, the love Celie experiences isn't really about fidelity or marriage. It's about how she feels with another human and her willingness to sacrifice and unconditionally care for them, as well as their willingness to do the same for her. An extremely important theme in this novel is the oppression of women. The women throughout the course of The Color Purple are severely oppressed, and it is hard for them to be content with life when they are being treated in a horrible manner. Some women, like Sophia, choose to stand up against men and fight for their rights, but their attempts are usually unsuccessful. Other women, like Celie, choose to be subservient to the desires of men because it is easier. There are a few women in the society who are mostly safe from these men, but it is only the ones who can support themselves on their own, which is why Celie gains independence and confidence when she starts her own business in Tennessee. The quote on the screen right now helps to emphasize the realistic style of writing that includes slang that was prevalent during people in this time period in real life. The theme of marriage is also found in The Color Purple. In this novel, marriage doesn't mean much. Rather than tying two people who love each other together, it is more of an economical bind. Celie was giving a Mister even though he wanted Nettie. Celie's father gave her away because she wasn't pure, like Nettie because of his rape of her. Thus, Celie and Mister are married without any love, and Celie is forced to take the abuse from her new husband and has to take care of his kids, all while Mister is in love with Shug Avery. There are several motifs found in The Color Purple. The first is the motif of letters. An important aspect of the book is the fact that it is written in the form of letters from Celie, with the recipient of the letters changing as the novel progresses. In the beginning, she addresses the letters to God, writing down what has happened to her without much thought or emotion. When she receives the letters from Nettie, she shifts to writing to her with much more feeling involved. Celie's transformation is revealed through these letters as well. She never signs the letters in the beginning, signifying her low self-esteem. As she builds confidence and finds herself throughout the novel, she begins to sign them, revealing how she feels whole and human. A second important motif is that of colors. Colors play an important role throughout the novel as well. Brighter colors are used to represent the liberation many of the characters experience as the novel progresses. When Celie is taken out by her husband's sister, the color options for dresses are drab, muted colors like brown and dark blue. Later on, Celie begins to pay more attention to brighter colors as she sews a quilt made of yellow fabric, and also sees the color purple as a wonderful creation by God. Mister's transition to a better man is represented by him painting the walls of the house white, signaling a fresh start. An important symbol that is found in The Color Purple is that of sewing. Sewing represents an outlet for the women and can get something good out of channeling their energy into a positive and creative outlet. After an argument between Sophia and Celie, they decided to make a quilt together to represent a truce. The quilt itself was a group of diverse patterns and colors representing how diverse people come together. Celie's life is represented through the quilt. Much like the mismatched design of a quilt, Celie's support system at the end of the book is made up of both men and women with various roles, sexual orientations, and even different talents. Sewing also represents Celie's ability to gain independence. She begins to sew pants, and when she realizes that that is her talent, she turns it into a business. This challenges Celie's original view of sewing as unimportant and simply a way to keep women busy. Instead, it becomes a way for Celie to break free from her abuser and gain economic independence that she never thought she could have. A second important symbol in this book is that of God. Celie's idea of God was never clear. From the beginning of the book, she understands that he plays a role in her life, but she never is quite sure how important that role should be. In the beginning, she sees God as a shoulder to cry on, but later changes her perception thanks to help from Shug. She no longer feels reliant upon him and believes he must be asleep since he wasn't making her problems go away. She later writes a letter beginning with, "Dear God, dear stars, dear trees, dear sky, dear peoples, dear everything, dear God." This signals Celie's change in her perception of God and no longer relies on him, but relies on herself to create her life for herself and write her own story, and sees God in everything, rather than as one figure. As a whole, The Color Purple by Alice Walker includes many symbols, themes, and motifs, all of which signify the struggle of blacks and women throughout this time period.